Hello and welcome. In this episode, there's a pocket forming at Lyman. It's probably already closed. We don't know how many Russian troops are encircled there. And further than that, more news about the mobilization and the consequences of the annexation. The first news, we are going to start not along the front line here, but about Belarus. We have news from a opposition politician from the Belarus opposition, and he's saying that Lukashenko and Putin agreed that Lukashenko will supply 120,000 soldiers until they are supposed to fight between November and February, so right after the Rasputitsa, and that Belarus will also supply food and supply and equipment and everything for 100,000 further soldiers. Now, if this is true, that would mean over 200,000 soldiers will probably appear on this front line, ready to open a new front. The quality of those troops is a much bigger question. It's far from certain that their combat value is actually of any use. But if that is even remotely true, this would be a huge problem for the Ukrainians, who don't have the forces to stop an invasion of that size there anywhere close to now. So they would have to weaken other fronts to reinforce the area, which will obviously shrink their advances and their successes in other regions. When we're coming to the Eastern Front here, we have Ukrainian attacks towards Tavilsanka, which is here over the bridgehead here at Dvorishna. And supposedly it has already reached the town, so I can't fully confirm that. Ukrainians have increased the bridgehead at Kupiansk over the Oskil River, and they are in the south. They have reached Kolesnikivka, which is here. So they are widening it south and they are widening it to the east. And the southern advance is going to meet, if the Russians can't stop it, fairly soon with the southern advance, which is also going north along the Oskil Reservoir to obviously link up here and completely free the left side of the Oskil River in this region. Russian military bloggers, basically the last days they are advancing in this region. Russian military bloggers talk about the advances the Ukrainians achieve here. We have them basically reaching that ridge line here, more or less. That seems to be fairly sure. And the Russian military bloggers now first said 2 days ago that Ukrainian sabotage troops had reached Torske. Now, Torske is the last line of communication to Lyman, to the Lyman pocket, if they are actually here. Sabotage troops might be small, that might hinder and slow down Russian supply, Russian lines of communications, but they wouldn't really occupy them. So it might still possible for the Russians to retreat from here, but now the news from the last 24 hours is that the Russian military bloggers claim that regular troops have already reached Torske or are about to reach. This is not really completely sure yet, I have to say, even though I trust Russian sources on Russian defeats a lot more than pro-Ukrainian ones. If this is somewhat true, then the road line, at least, is cut off. Now, that doesn't mean the troops themselves are already lost. As the Rasputitsa is appearing slowly, it's fairly unlikely that they'll be able to get through the brushland, through the forests, get out with their vehicles. But if we see the distance here to the next line, that's like 10 kilometers. So 2 hours, fairly nice walking. Now, if they carry gear and if it's through harsh terrain, let's say 3 or 4 hours. But it's well within reach. And as of now, I have not heard that the Ukrainians have bypassed or conquered Yampil, so that area should still be under Russian control, but it would force the Russians to immediately withdraw. In the last days, there have been rumors that Putin supposedly ordered a no-retreat order. It's flying around. I have not seen official confirmation, but that at least would explain why Dobryshev and Lyman still seem to be defended. I have not heard any report of Dobryshev having fallen. So in this pocket here, we will very likely see a 4-digit number of Russian troops. Now, how many, if it's 1,200 or 2,500, I can't possibly guess. But regarding the numbers we have heard before there, that should be at least 1,000 soldiers that might be close to being trapped here, or that might already be trapped. Further east, to the southeast, we have Kadyrov claiming that Chechens, together with other troops, have reached Spirne and are holding it, and that they defeated a Ukrainian counterattack. This is far from being confirmed. Just supposedly south of that line, more or less, we are reporting the attacks, the Russian attacks over the last weeks. So at least in this context, it would kind of make sense, even though I can't confirm it. We have further reported attacks in the Bakhmut area. Basically, more or less, the Ukrainians claim they defeated everything. I still don't really have proof whether the Russians are already in Bakhmut, but the New York Times is, no, Wagner is, the Russian sources say Wagner mercenaries are in Odradivka, which is here. New York Times wrote something about the fighters there from Wagner, and they say basically the majority of the Wagner fighters there are now the criminals, and supposedly a lot of them will capitulate at first contact. That's the New York Times, so generally more or less a reliable source, but I cannot really confirm that in this regard. And even if this is true, this is probably going to be fixed fairly soon from the Russian side by mixing some other troops in to prevent them from giving themselves up right away, which obviously is not the goal of using criminals here within Wagner. The Ukrainians say they defeated a lot of attacks against Avdiivka, basically around here. The Russians are also claiming the attack in this region. Not much has changed. I don't see any confirmation of territory changing hands. The Russians say Ukrainians attacked in Marinka and they defeated it. So more or less a stalemate. I still can't confirm if Russian troops have entered Bakhmut, the eastern outskirts, but it seems at least likely or possible. So I would not exclude that possibility. On the southern front, we have reports that the Russians are claiming they attacked a barracks in Zaporizhzhia, here in the city itself, or close to it, and they killed 100 soldiers of the 9th Special Forces Regiment, of the Ukrainian ones, as well as 50 what they call foreign mercenaries, which are actually foreign volunteers. Now, this is a report from the Russians, and we know how they exaggerate their numbers. I don't have any confirmation from the ground yet, but there might have been a strike on a well-used barracks here in Zaporizhzhia. This is at least what I've heard. The Ukrainians report on the whole southern area. So this year, they report for the 27th alone, 2 days ago, a full 50 UAV uses. A lot of them are Shahed 136, which would indicate that the Russians actually got supplied a fair lot of them if they can use them this deliberately, which is somewhat explained that they seem to be mostly made with commercially available parts and thus be fairly cheap in production. And the Iranians can probably produce a lot of them fairly fast. In Kherson, we have further reports about Ukrainian attacks on communication lines, on depots, and on command structures. Also, they hit ferries, barges, and the construction site at Novakharkovka. Here, the Russians are trying to basically fill up the locks here to create a solid bridge that can't be destroyed that easily, and they're trying to get that bridge going again, and the Ukrainians are attacking that construction site to prevent the construction work. According to Ukrainian side, every traffic of personnel is now being blocked over the Dnieper. The claim is from the Ukrainian side that this is done to prevent desertion and to prevent men from leaving, so they can forcibly recruit them once the annexation is being fulfilled, is being completely done. But this is, as said, Ukrainian reports, so they have their own interest in framing information that we get. Ukraine is claiming this week alone they shot down 6 planes and helicopters on the Kherson front. Usually I don't report that, but that number seems fairly high, and we actually have some visual confirmations. The reasoning for that might be a more aggressive use from the Russian side, or that the Ukrainians bring more air defense closer to the front line. An indication would be what I was supposed to be reporting later, that actually the first NASAMS has been arrived. NASAMS, not NASAMS. The first NASAMS system has arrived in Ukraine, which obviously, if it's defending, for instance, Odessa, would free some air defense systems there to get them closer to the front line, and thus threaten the Russian air operations in that region further. Russia itself has also attacked air installations, or the Ukrainian Air Force. It has attacked a military airfield in Kryvyi Rih and heavily damaged. The Ukrainians themselves say it's unusable now. It's completely destroyed. Whether they lost planes there, though, is not confirmed. In the north, we have in the bridgehead in the north, we have reports about heavy fighting, but no change in positions whatsoever, and obviously artillery as at the rest of the front line. Center at the Inulets bridgehead, I also don't have any reports from the south. I have very little reports as well, so the front line seems to be more or less not moving too much. But what is interesting again, we have more news from Bezimene. Here again, the Ukrainians, now this time they claim not having been bombed, but they claim they defeated a Russian attack. So more and more claims that would indicate that this area is actually under Ukrainian control. But in the global look at things here along the front line, that's not really that important whether they have actually moved the front line further south a few kilometers, like 6 kilometers or not. That's it already, what I have from the front line, so fairly unmoved. The only thing what we're happening is that the Ukrainians are on the offensive again in the rest of the occupied Kherson Oblast, and that they have achieved some breakthroughs and are widening them, and that the Russian defensive lines have definitely not solidified enough to stop them. And the Russians are trying their best to do that, and there we have some information about the further mobilization. Now, this is translated from Russian. Unfortunately, Google translates it to German here for me. So it basically says the woman of somebody who was mobilized in Lipetsk is saying after one day of training, he was sent to the front line in Donetsk. And we have more examples like this here. For instance, it's a soldier who said it, that after 2 days without any basic training, within 2 days, without any basic training, they will be sent to Kherson already. And the author of that has contacted him and even talked to or written with the guy. So I'm going to link you that Twitter feed so you can read it for yourself. The military commissioner in Novosibirsk has told local media that they are actually going to ignore the orders about the mobilization if they can't find enough men to fulfill the official requirements, because he needs to fill the quota. He needs to recruit, to mobilize enough men, and if needed, he's going to take those that are exempt, from students to guys who have never served in the army, and is going to put them in uniform. We have further proof that, and there have been pictures circulating, that the Russians set up mobilization centers right along the borders. It is still unclear whether the Russians are already banning men to leave the country. In some regions, there seems to be an attempt to it, but I have not, at the time of this recording, heard of an official order that no men are allowed out anymore. But the saying was that they take men that are about to leave and force them to go into a recruitment center, hoping to make them somehow sign up at that very moment. And at the same time, they also started now to have lists on the front line to check if you are leaving, whether you have been called up at some point. Even though that seems to be that it's more like a regional thing, so that the regions themselves, North Ossetia was here the main culprit, that they might do that by themselves to fill up their quota. So if you are from Donetsk, from Rostov-on-Don, you might be very well able, even if you're called up, you might be able to go through the border crossing in North Ossetia towards Georgia, but that is not confirmed as of now. After rumors that Russia would ask Georgia and Kazakhstan to hand over men fleeing from the mobilization, that those have been refuted, but the interior minister of Kazakhstan has said they will only extradite people that have done a crime that is also criminal in Kazakhstan, and also only if those people are on international wanted lists. What Kazakhstan will accept here as a list would then be interesting once it comes up, whether Russia is still allowed to put somebody like this on, like somebody draft dodging, to put him on an Interpol list. I am somewhat doubtful, even though I have to admit this is not my field of expertise, but it might be possible that Kazakhstan again is showing how much it wants to distance itself from Russia here, that they might actually try to allow Russian draft dodgers to get away by staying in Kazakhstan and not extraditing them as well. The news, we have news from the Kuznetsov Naval Academy in St. Petersburg. The one-year cadets seem to be prepared for use in Ukraine. Now, it is unclear yet whether they're going to be combat soldiers. It's much more likely that they will have to command the mobilized troops, as they at least have some formal training and they were being prepared for future command positions. But again, it shows us how badly the personnel situation is when it comes to competent leaders in Russia, that you take one-year military cadets and send them. And the GUR, the Ukrainian Military Intelligence, again, Ukrainian is an active war participant, so they have interests to frame it. We shouldn't take it too serious. I say that almost every time. They claim that those cadets are no longer allowed to leave. They are no longer allowed to be in contact with their parents, and that the leadership of the Naval Academy is refusing to meet parents of those cadets. There are rumors that the men fleeing mobilization in Georgia have to sign papers that condemn the Russian aggression and acknowledge that Russia is occupying Georgian land, meant here South Ossetia and Abkhazia in particular. At the beginning of the war, there were reports that Georgian banks were forcing Russians opening bank accounts to sign something something similar. And if that was to be true, and that's the little boy already playing a role. If this was actually true, then it would constitute a crime within Russia to sign something like this and break Russian law. So those people could basically legally no longer go back to Russia unless they want to be threatened with imprisonment. Unfortunately, the little saboteur has woken up. Ukraine is now saying that this is a journalist, as far as I understand it, journalist with the Kiev Post. He's saying that the Ukrainians are going to allow Russian prisoners of war to call home to keep their mental health. What he's not saying, and what will definitely be the reason, is that Kiev wants to make sure that the Russian families that are being called understand that being a prisoner of war within Ukraine is a real alternative. And if they get calls from them every 5 days, and the soldiers, the prisoners of war, tell them they are being treated nicely, they are not being tortured, they are getting proper food, etc., it'll obviously entice a lot more Russian mobilized soldiers, new fresh conscripts, to turn sides and to switch over to the Ukrainian side, to hand themselves over to avoid being killed. Now, they will obviously not advertise that, because then Russia would prevent those phone calls, and I would not be surprised if we hear about it fairly soon, that Russia is somehow cutting the lines or in other ways preventing the Russians from the Ukrainians from calling them. Zelensky himself has made a speech in Russian. I'll play it here for you.
Хотите жить – бегите. Хотите жить – сдавайтесь в плен. Хотите жить – боритесь. Боритесь на своих улицах и за свою свободу. У вас и так все забрали. Или у кого-то из вас есть нефтяные вышки, есть дворцы, есть виноградники, а может у вас есть яхты или какой-то банк. Вы за что вообще боретесь? У вас есть только кредиты, что-то вечером пожрать и теперь мобилизация. Боритесь за свое. Не лезьте на нашу землю, в нашу душу и в нашу культуру. Слава Украине!
So as you can see, he's basically telling Russian soldiers to also give themselves up if they want to save their lives, which is probably a campaign now that Ukraine is smartly doing to make sure that the Russian soldiers that are highly demotivated, that can't have high morale, that they don't fight and rather give themselves up and being basically taken out of the pool of potential Russian soldiers. When it comes to the political side, we have the results of the so-called referendums. Obviously, they have been a farce from the beginning, and the results are now in, and they are, to a big surprise, they are at 87 to 99% confirming that the regions want to join Russia. We are not really surprised by that. Tomorrow, it is expected that tomorrow the annexation might be announced, because Putin is going to have a speech in front of the parliament, in front of both houses of the parliament, and that would allow the Russians to conscript Ukrainian men on the 1st of October, when the regular conscription cycle is going to happen. But there are now considerations that it might not happen, because internal polls supposedly have shown that the Russian public isn't interested in the annexations over the drama over the mobilization. So they might push it back until the big excitement about the mobilization has passed, to then announce the annexation to raise morale again. But this is, as of now, this is like rumors going around, so we don't really have any confirmation about that yet. That was it in the political part, and we end up with the support. There is more reports. The US are going to send another $1.1 billion of weapon, including another 18 HIMARS. As far as I remember, they right now have 16, so they are doubling the number basically. And as you can see here, you can pause it, which will show the stuff they are getting. So the reinforcement will be fairly nicely in the amount what they are getting. And also the Ukrainians are now having M31A1 GLMRS available for the HIMARS. They have a 90-kilometer range, and they can be, the fuse can be set to penetration, so it basically sinks into the target and then detonates, which would be perfect for bridges, for bunkers, for other things like that. They can be set at detonation on impact, and they can be set at airburst, so to do the most damage to light-skinned vehicles and infantry around that. A very powerful round, fairly long range, which will now be also, which is now also confirmed to be in Ukrainian hand. And the last thing I already said is that NASAMS has already reached Ukraine, so the Ukrainian air defense is now getting better again. That was it for now. I hope you enjoyed it. I have, like, this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. So if you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means shown to you in the description. I very much appreciate all the support this channel gets to help me grow it. Thank you very much. And if you don't want to donate, you can obviously also help by spreading the word around, by sharing the channel, recommending it to your friends and acquaintances, by subscribing if you haven't subscribed yet. Hit the bell button to not miss any future videos. Don't forget to thumbs up and leave a comment what you think, how far this will go, or just to feed YouTube's algorithm, create some engagement. That is it for now. I thank you for your time. I will be back on Saturday with the live stream as announced. I think it is already announced. Other than that, it will be at 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'll see you then, and thank you for watching, and I'll be back.